Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another weekly fighting roundup. And so, of course, got the boxing and MMA news today. So, if you're new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. Like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So, a lot of boxing news this week, and in general, quite a lot of MMA news as well. And so, starting off, we'll start off with Collins will fight February 14th. Mike Tyson's wife has said Tyson won't fight again. Hopefully, that is the case, to be honest. I mean, you would like to think if anybody's going to stop him actually from fighting again, you'd like to hope that it is his wife. Ennis is in talks to fight Lopez. Will we see that happen? Perhaps. I mean, it seems like every time that we hear Ennis in talks to fight anybody big, that it just kind of spirals out and doesn't end up happening. But they're in talks, and hopefully we'll see it because we kind of have to see a big Ennis fight next. His Excellency has announced the WBC Grand Prix of Boxing to start in February. I'm a big fan of this, and I hope that it's going to go, and I hope it goes ahead. And it's going to be interesting to see how it works because realistically, it is kind of making promoters a bit irrelevant, and this is what the whole thing with His Excellency has been able to do, kind of take out the promoters out of the scene, to be honest. And when you think the amount, I think there's about 128 prospects. They're going to be the top prospects, so that's top prospects out of the kind of promoters pool. So what's that going to do for promoters in their events? Are they going to be able to stack their events the way that they used to? Are they going to have to get new names in from the amateurs, or move fighters along quicker? I'm not too sure. We'll have to wait and see how it works out. But it's an exciting prospect, and it's going to get some good prospects, and yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who inevitably actually ends up winning. And yeah, His Excellency has been named to WBC Man of the Year, so that is a big achievement for himself to get, and it's not really too surprising that he has been given that award, saying what he has done for boxing. Suleiman has said Ben deserves a world title shot, and that's for the WBC title, perhaps, or for any of them. In the welterweight division, it probably is fair to say that Ben maybe does deserve a world title shot, or at least, is not too far away because the welterweight division isn't really too stacked at the moment. If it's any other division, perhaps you kind of argue different things, but I just think, yeah, the welterweight division perhaps isn't the most stacked at the moment. Gallagher and Flint has joined GBM Sports. Larfield won via TKO in round 4 versus Martin. McIntyre won via KO in round 1 versus Macomb. Keating won via TKO in round 2 versus Woods. Blizzard won via unanimous decision versus Yang. Fletcher won via unanimous decision versus Etienne to become Australian super middleweight champion. Ayakuzo won via unanimous decision versus Miller. Huni won via TKO in round 2 versus Rabuti. Wallace won by TKO in round 8 versus Wellham, and the kind of main thing I wanted to touch upon is the fact that Huni is progressing well, and to be honest, same as Wallace, but Huni, took quite a big step back from the big kind of win, even though he did almost get stopped and got hurt. He's kind of gone really back and started resetting again and rebuilding again and really trying to keep active again. He's now fighting in January as well, which I'll talk about in a second. And so, it's interesting to see how his career is moving the way in which it's moving. It's no longer kind of these big Saudi cards against actual well-known names. It's now kind of moved on to lesser names and getting big wins, but perhaps it's just a confidence building type thing. Moving on, Raider won via unanimous decision versus Reynolds. Avosia 2 won via KO in round 6 versus Nico. Peters won via TKO in round 1 versus Holden. Jarvis won via TKO in round 4 versus Rodriguez. O'Connell won by split decision versus Parr. Robinson won by unanimous decision versus Scott to become IBF World Middleweight Champion. And I got my prediction right for this one from what I believe. I think I said it would have been that kind of upset with Robinson being able to win. To be honest, I haven't been able to find the footage to be able to, see what happened and everything like that. But from what I've heard, it was Scott starting off quickly, starting off well, and then it progressed on to Robinson being able to get her way, find her way with things, and being able to have quite a lot of success through there, and inevitably, like I say, being able to win via unanimous decision, perhaps getting that surprising type win. Perhaps Scott was expecting to be able to win before because she'd already beaten her once before. Obviously, that wasn't the case. Robinson now champion. Obviously, the middleweight division in women's boxing isn't really the most stacked at the moment. It's had the likes of and Clarissa Shields. They've still probably got the likes of Savannah Marshall, I think, still floating about, and Franklin Cruz Dezern. But there's a few other fighters as well. You've got Shadesa Green, and you've got, like I said, perhaps a couple other ones. But at the same time, they're not really that high level, and you got to think fighters like Robinson perhaps shouldn't be getting these title shots, but nonetheless, she's a world champion, and so all credit to her. And O'Connell getting that surprising decision win versus Parr. Parr was bigged up heavily by the No Limits Boxing team, and so obviously to get that as a loss was quite surprising, and I think it was surprising in general. From what I've heard, again, I've not been able to find the footage. It was a close fight, and I think a lot of people were leaning more towards Parr winning that one. Um, and it was also good to see Brock Jarvis back with a good stoppage and a return stoppage at middleweight, and it's going to be interesting to see who he fights next. He's called out Nikita Zoo, I believe, so yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who he fights next. Moving on, Foreman won via TKO in round 2 versus Zarska. Ennis won via TKO round 1 versus Wojtowicz. Wilcox won via unanimous decision versus Pinto. Bailey won via unanimous decision versus Ortiz to remain WBA World Light Flyweight Champion. Lima won via unanimous decision versus Singh to become IBO World Super Welterweight Champion. And yeah, again, I got my prediction right for this one as well. And well, the Bailey fight, I got my prediction right for that one, saying a unanimous decision. I got my prediction right, and somebody who I've had the pleasure of speaking to on this channel, and actually a great talent, a really, really great talent, an underrated fighter currently in the women's rankings, and I really hope gets some really big opportunities soon. I mean, she's already a world champion after just 4 or 5 fights, and so yeah, she's going through these ranks, these levels really well, and Ortiz opponent was quite a good opponent, in my opinion, to put her against, and she progressed through that very well again, and so that's a first title defence for herself, and a successful one at that, and so, she moves on. Lima got that away from home win against Singh, where Singh was, perhaps the favourite, the one with the better record, but hadn't fought the same level of opponents, and Lima was that more bullish type fighter, and Singh wasn't able to physically match that, and also with his shots make Lima respect him, and Lima in the end was putting together some quite nice combinations, just full into the head into the later rounds, and that's kind of how I said it would go, and I got my prediction right for that one. And now IBO World Super Welterweight Champion. It's going to be interesting to see how he progresses and where he goes next, because you never really know who he's going to fight or where he's going to fight with Lima. Moving on, Cattrall is set to fight Barboza Jr. February 15th. I think that is a good fight. Walton won via majority decision versus Hanley. T.R. Built won by unanimous decision versus Spence. Ingram won by TKO round 1 versus Espinoza. Pemberton won by majority decision versus Mitchell. Bray won via TKO in round 1 versus Rios. Macayo won by KO in round 2 versus Escandon. Hovhannissian won by majority decision versus Maylata. Sedano won by unanimous decision versus Ramos. Blanco won via majority decision versus Estella. Pero won via TKO in round 1 versus Burns. Vargas won via TKO in round 10 versus Guerrero to become WBA World Interim Bantamweight Champion, and that's quite a good accolade to have at the moment. I'm not sure where Vargas is going to progress on to next. A good performance on a good Most Valuable Prospect show, and probably their best one yet, to be honest. And yeah, they progress on in the bantamweight division. Perhaps we could see him against like a Nakatani or somebody. You never know. We'll have to see where, like I say, he goes on to next. Rocha won via unanimous decision versus Hernandez. Mendez won via KO round 1 versus Tercero. Banks won via unanimous decision versus Young. Benjamin won via TKO in round 1 versus Casper. Akitsugi won via KO in round 6 versus Paliste. Nunez won via unanimous decision versus Baez. Cardoso won via unanimous decision versus Ramirez. Lee won via KO in round 1 versus Shreve. Taylor won via TKO in round 3 versus Jackson. Worthington won via unanimous decision versus Paulus. Vella won via unanimous decision versus Bouvier. Smith won by majority decision versus Townsell. Spencer won by majority decision versus Hernandez. Holmes Jr. won via unanimous decision versus Humane Jr. Bassi won via points versus Mooney. Lee won via points versus Orsag. Courtney won via points versus Ferenczi. Sainz won via TKO in round 2 versus Prot Kunas. Ryan won via TKO in round 2 versus Radomska. Lidard won via TKO in round 1 versus Ilunga. And, that Lidard win was a good win. Sorry if I'm progressing for a bit fast, just, a few cards that were, quite big cards, but nothing too crazy happening in them. Yeah, the Lidard win was a good win for him, headlining for the first, I believe the first or second time on a new kind of promotions that's coming through, but Lidard, again, a very tough test in my opinion, or a good step up next time out, which we'll talk about in a second. Pacquiao's team are pushing for the Barrios fight still, so, with Conor Benn being still talks about fighting with Eubank, being talks about fighting with Barrios, calling out Barrios multiple times. There is still talks about possibly Pacquiao getting involved, and Pacquiao perhaps isn't pushing for the fight himself personally, but his team seems to be doing so, and so maybe that's going to happen. I mean, it's interesting to see, Barrios is in a position where he's getting called out by a lot of big names, and he's coming off a draw. Like, people just want to fight him, I think, because they see him as that weaker option, as that easier option in the division, but he's got a lot of options available to him, and if he wants a Pacquiao fight, that could be perhaps an easier payday than that of a Ben fight. So it could be down to him as to who he fights and what happens next for his career. Dubois has been elevated to WBC a lightweight world champion. That's after Katie Taylor has vacated her belt. Crocklem has joined Top Rank. The winner of Morel versus Benavides will be mandatory for the winner of Beterbiev versus Bivol 2. That was all going smooth sailing until today. From what I believe, from what I'm hearing from the rumours, it seems like Beterbiev Bivol is being pushed back because of Beterbiev getting injury. I'm not too sure how long that's getting pushed back for. I think the whole card's still available, but or going to be going ahead, but I think that does slow things up a bit, and at least there is that plan ahead of obviously we're gonna have to wait again for the Bivol vs Beterbiev this time rematch, but there is that plan ahead with Morel Benavides. They probably are going to sit out and wait after you know after the fights, after they fight, and then just wait for that opportunity. But like I said, there is that plan ahead, which is nice to see. Eubank Jr. has agreed to a 55-45 split for the Ben fights, and so is that actually going to happen? I don't know. There's a lot of back and forth with money and everything like that, so I'm never really too sure what's happening with them, but perhaps they've actually agreed something now. We'll see. Like I say, I'm not too sure personally. Moving on. Um, Ball versus Doheny. Kane vs Edwards, Strand vs Baluta, Herrera and Turner will fight March 15th. I think that's quite a good show, to be honest. I mean, I don't personally think there is too much of a rush with Nick Ball to put him in with, the best of the best other unified champions. Perhaps after this fight, I would like to see that be the case, but he's already fought Ray Vargas and he's already fought Raymond Ford as well, and they're two very big names to be fighting. So, progressed quite quickly in his career. So it's nice now he's got his belt that he's actually going through mandatory kind of challenges or voluntary type challenges and having taken his time, having these fights in Liverpool and having success with it. And this is going to be an interesting fight. I mean, Doheny didn't look awful versus Inoue. He had his elements of success. He obviously had the injury, which was a bit of a strange injury, and we're going to have to hope that he's not going to have anything like that again. But he still, like I say, had his success at times, and so perhaps the Ball fight is an interesting fight, and it could retire a legend if Doheny does lose. But Kane vs Edwards, I think, is an excellent fight. Edwards is really pushing for that world title. Perhaps if he gets through Kane, he's going to be able to get that, but I think that's a very tough test for both of them. Moving on, the British Boxing Board have ordered Itoma versus Adelaide. Of course, Itoma has to get through McKean, but that would be a great fight to make as well. I don't really know what kind of level Itoma's at. Going from a McKean to an Adelaide, is that a step down? I'm not too sure. Balanga is set to fight in March, not really kind of talked about or announced as what opponent yet. As we now know, it's not going to be Munguia most likely, so we'll have to wait and see. Bicoli has agreed to fight a Jagba. I still think that's a great fight, and it's been agreed now to happen. Shields will fight Perkins February 2nd. Shields going for them unified or undisputed, I think, heavyweight titles, and I'm not really too sure if Perkins is a champion of heavyweight or not. I'm not too clued up on it as of at the moment, just with what Perkins has done. I believe she's a seasoned amateur, but like I say, it's a good fight. It's always nice to see Shields back. Shuni will fight Potier Gia January 8th, like I say, him being very active, fighting in December, fighting the next month in January, and that's what I like to see. Simpson versus Woodall, Dubois versus Kamara, Edwards versus Woodstock, Hickey, Denise, Silver, and Price will fight January 11th. Tia Bolt has joined Most Valuable Promotions. McCann has had adverse findings in his drugs test, which is something which is very interesting, and to be honest has come as a bit of a shock, come out of the blue a little bit. Obviously, that he was meant to be fighting McGrail just this next weekend on the Fury Usyk undercard, and now we have this. And I mean, when Eddie Hearn, of course, you look back to when Eddie Hearn got a lot of slander because of the Ben situation. Is Frank Warren going to get that same level of slander? Is he going to back his fighter the same way? It's interesting to see how Eddie Hearn isn't jumping on Frank Warren and really kind of saying anything too bad about him. Obviously, perhaps they were on different terms at that time. They've made up and they're better, they're closer now. Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn, so perhaps they're not going to go back and forth like they once was. But at the same time, like I say, this is a very bad thing. McCann is a very well respected prospect and is progressing, has been progressing excellently through the Queensberry ranks, and is now getting this huge opportunity. And this has of course come up, and so we're gonna have to see these B testings and everything like that. We're gonna have to go through that whole long process again, and it means that McGrail fight is unfortunately off, which is a shame because I was excited to see that fight, to be fair. And like I say, McCann's gonna have to go through that process of Ben. Hopefully, it seems like people are more backing McCann. I don't necessarily know if that's fair upon Ben or not, but it seems like people are backing McCann to say that he's innocent. But like I say, we'll have to wait and see what happens with that. Optaya versus Sin Cara is off. It seems like Optaya is still going to fight probably a top ranked guy at some point in January or on that card, I believe still. Inoue will fight Goodman January 24th. So Goodman had got an injury and then it got pushed back a month. And I'm quite glad, to be honest, that it's has been pushed back and it's not been a change of opponent, because Goodman's worked really hard to get this opportunity and I believe it was his last spar, and so I felt really bad for him if it was going to get cancelled and everything like that. And like I say, he worked hard for it, and so it's nice to see that it's just been pushed back a month, nothing too crazy. Garner will fight Jimenez March 1st. Smith versus Oiza. Scarf vs Walker, Scotney vs Motu, Farnell versus Dickinson, and Udin will fight January 25th. Great to see Dalton Smith back. Great to see boxing back in Nottingham. Pacheco vs Nelson, Cruz vs Salcido, and Mercado vs Pedraza will fight January 25th. That's also on the same day, so it's Matchroom putting out two cards on the same day, which I find interesting that they want to do. But yeah, it's a good, goodish fight, I think, for Pacheco. It's a little bit more of a progression, I believe, and like I say, it just makes it see what's going to happen now with the likes of Belanga, the likes of Bealey. I have to wait and see actually what happens with them now. Moving on, Lidard versus Osaze, Boston versus Fawaz, Buttigieg, Viacioli, Sainz, and Bevan will fight January 31st. That is a good prospects card for, or next gen card for Matchroom. And yeah, like I say, Lidard getting that step up, which I think is a big step up, to be honest. Hernandez will fight Giron February 28th. Crocker will fight Donovan March 1st. That's a fight in which, to be honest, I'm very happy to see. Sometimes when you have two fighters that are fighting from the same country, especially like Ireland, it's not a big country, but they've got a big support and a big fan base. They wait and wait and wait promoters to really try and hype that fight to build that fight up, and which I don't blame them for, but it just slows it down. And this is a great fight, and it's happening at a good point, and I believe both of their careers. And so yeah, it's just nice to see that it's happening at this point. Brown will fight March 28th. Riley will fight Chamberlain February 1st. Terra Moana Jr. won via TKO in round 1 versus Kat Sook. Ferreira won via unanimous decision versus Buderza to remain IBF World Lightweight Champion. Hughes won via unanimous decision versus Cully. Mosquera won via split decision versus Clark to become European Cruiserweight Champion. Akhmadaliev won via TKO in round 3 versus Espinoza to become WBA Interim World Super Bantamweight Champion. And to speak about this card as a whole, it's a good, quite an entertaining actually, Matchroom Monaco show. And you start off with the heavyweight Moana Jr. putting on a clinical, well, brutal, quite performance where, yeah, it was a great knockout for himself. Ferreira looked excellent. I got my prediction right again for that one. Looked excellent versus Buderza. Completely beat her down. I'm surprised that the corner didn't get jumped in. Well, didn't jump in, didn't get involved. And Ferreira progresses on. I feel like I need to see that fight versus Dubois at this point, to be honest. But will we see it? We'll have to wait and see. Hughes, that unanimous decision versus Cully was an excellent performance from Hughes. I really like that kind of style in which Hughes has now got, where he's kind of bouncing in, bouncing out, popping up when needs be, and just going in with the singular shots. Because he's having a lot of success. I think against a lot of opponents, especially at that level, he's going to be able to wipe out, to be honest. And even at the age in which he's at, he's still having a lot of success. And something like a William Cepeda was a bad matchup for him, but other than this, like a fighter like Cully was able to kind of expose a bit, and I've never really, thought too highly of Cully, to be honest. I thought he was quite a big thing when he came onto the scene, being on these undercards for Katie Taylor and everything. But now, I don't really think there's too much left for him, or he's going to have to really work himself back up to be able to get back to opportunities, I believe. But Maxie Hughes has gotten himself right back involved into the higher rankings. Mosquera, that split decision versus Clark, he obviously got the knockdown in the first round, and it was quite impressive to see that Clark was able to recover the way in which he was. But perhaps he did do enough to win quite a few of the rounds and perhaps win the fight. But it was a very close fight. Mascara, it was nice to see him get that win because you could tell how much it meant to him, and it's nice to see not just the matchroom prospect getting the win when it was a close decision. Will we see a rematch? Probably, but at the same time, I think Clark has to develop upon a few defensive things, in my opinion, if he really wants to progress, in which the way I'm sure he does. Akhmadaliev, that was a great stoppage versus Espinoza. Got my prediction right. I think I said it was going to be a little bit later on in the fight, but nonetheless, like I say, I got my prediction right in the way of who I thought would win. And Akhmadaliev put on a great performance after a year out. Perhaps it was a fight in which he needed to just, like I say, get that kind of ring rust off and get back after a year out. And it was a very impressive stoppage, the way that he was able to just land shots, be so clean, be so accurate, be so comfortable being able to counter. And Espinoza perhaps wasn't as front foot as aggressive, in which perhaps certain people thought. I thought he possibly could have got a knockdown or hurt Akhmadaliev in the earlier rounds, but Akhmadaliev shut him out, and that was a great performance. And will we see the Inoue fight next? Probably not, to be completely honest. But nonetheless, like I say, it's a great performance from him. And there is a few fights in which I'd like to see if he progresses on, when he progresses on, but probably we'll see him get elevated to a full world champion before we see the Inoue fights, just in my opinion. Anya Konya won via a decision versus Roldan to become WBC Youth World Featherweight Champion. Reyes won via TKO in round 7 versus Sosa. Romero won via KO in round 3 versus Coelho. Perez won via a decision versus Abdu Karov. Suarez won via KO in round 6 versus Munguia. And, in general, that was the shocking thing of the week, to be honest. I mean, Race landing the shot in which he did, only got 4 KOs on his 25 winning record. To be able to land on Munguia the way that he did, Munguia looked poor. He was going through the same shots over and over again, was staying in range, was looking quite sloppy. I think he was trying to just bully him. Munguia had improved a lot with every single fight the past few ones. Even the Canelo fight, he looked improved, and then just this looked really poor. I had heard that he split from Freddie Roach and everything like that. So perhaps this new team, this new corner, isn't doing the same things for him in which they should be. But that was a poor performance from him. And even though he got the knockdown early and he was trying to be bullish and trying to just force it, Suresh landed the shot, and it's really kind of brought Munguia back down to earth, I'm sure. And it's going to be interesting to see where they both go on to next. It's made quite a big implication into the super middleweight division. Of course, Munguia was in such a high position, had such great matchups on the table for him if he just gotten through this Suresh fight. And that's boxing for you. Sometimes you stay in the bad position too long. Sometimes you make one mistake and it shuts you out. And Suresh, all credit to him. Will we see a rematch? Perhaps. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm sure, Top Rank, Golden Boy, I'm not too sure who he's even promoted by Munguia anymore, are going to be very surprised and not really sure already what to do with Munguia now. Moving on, Divine won by points versus Durant. Cartwright won by points versus Achgro Karnov. Talon won by points versus Norman. Stringer won by points versus Mungombe. Riley won by TKO in round 2 versus Garber. Jeffers won via TKO in round 3 versus Corte. Cutler won by majority decision versus McKenna to become WBC International Silver Super Welterweight Champion. Price won via TKO in round 3 versus Matthias to remain IBO and WBA World Welterweight Champion. Jonas won via decision versus Habazin to become IBF and WBC World Welterweight Champion. And to speak about this card, I had the privilege of being at the presser for it, and you saw some back and forth rivalries between Cutler and McKenna. That fight ended up living up to the expectations and was a great fight in the end, to be honest, where Cutler had the success. McKenna, I think defensively does have quite a lot of issues that he should deal with, and to be able to progress he needs to be able to deal with that, and he just couldn't force Cutler to get out of there, and Cutler landed some big shots when needed to and dropped him when needed to, and it was a close fight, but Cutler of course managing to win. Will we see a rematch? Again, I'm not too sure. Another fight in which perhaps we might see a rematch, but it was a sharp performance, a kind of outboxing performance in the end from Cutler. Price, that TKO was weird. I mean, Matthias looked completely out of it every time that Price landed. Price has that power there, but you wouldn't think that she has the power there to be able to really damage somebody. And Matthias, every time she got caught with that right, it was just down, down, down every round, and then ended up turning the back and then getting dropped. And yeah, perhaps it was shown to be a bit of a mismatch in the end. And Price, that's a great performance for herself. She looks excellent again. She progresses on again, and now has Jonas as probably the next opponent. Of course, Jonas fought Habazin. I thought Jonas looked excellent in that fight, to be honest. I thought that was one of her better performances coming after the fights versus Maya and the timeout. I wasn't too sure what to expect from her, but I thought she moved very well, went into the body nicely, like I said she would, and looked better after every exchange, and just had a lot more success. And yeah, in general, I think that was an excellent performance from herself, and is really going to set up nicely that prize fight. And didn't show the age or anything too much, which was, in my opinion, what I wanted to see if it was going to set up the prize fight. I didn't want her to just be in a scrappy fight, but I like the kind of back and forth. It looked like it was going to be like a nice chilled back and forth. But then Price had a few words to say. Jones responded with a few of her own, and that's what you like to see. It's building things up a bit. I think Price is gaining more confidence in her, speaking and everything like that with the way that she's progressing, and she should. She has full right to. She's fighting very, very well, and so hopefully we'll see that fight sometime next year. Moving on, Meza won via KO in round 1 versus Musique. Avelino Reyes won via KO in round 2 versus Garcia. Cabrera won via KO in round 2 versus Diagan. Rule Avalcaba won via unanimous decision versus Charlotte. Chavez won via unanimous decision versus Casero. Morales won via stoppage in round 7 versus Ortiz. Esparza won via unanimous decision versus Musino. Ramirez won via unanimous decision versus Bowie. Conwell won via KO in round 7 versus Vergara. Rocha drew versus Curiel. And to be honest, it's a surprising thing again, but at the same time, I just don't think Rocha is going to be able to get back to the momentum, the progression in which he once had. It was a great fight, to be honest. It was a back and forth type of fight. I think Rocha just gets involved into fights a bit too much like that and can't physically match a lot of opponents. The same problem in which I think he had versus Santillan, even though Santillan did have an excellent performance that night. Like I say, yeah, it was a good fight, but I do think that does slow Roach down again. And Curiel, I'd like to see a rematch between the two of them. But like I said, I'm not too sure if Roach is ever going to be able to make it back to the top of that welterweight division, which I think if he was to win that Curiel fight, he could have even gone in for a world title shot. But yeah, nonetheless, he's gone in with a tough Mexican again and not been able to get through, but still had a great fight and showed a lot of heart nonetheless. Moving on to Belot, Elmazi, and Khan will fight January 11th. Zarafa has joined No Limits Boxing. White won via stoppage around 7 versus Tete. That was, again, a prediction in which I got right, but I think most people got it right. I think most people were surprised it went the rounds in which it did. It was a messy fight. White did look the better anytime he was throwing punches, but just didn't put his foot down enough. I think he could have got him out there much earlier. Tete looked tough and durable, but anytime he went into exchanges, it looked wild, it looked messy, it looked sloppy, it looked like some kind of like an old man fighting, to be honest. It didn't really look like it was a 36-year-old. It looked older than that. He looked like he was 50 fighting, and yeah, he was a big guy and a big lump, but White did eventually manage to get him out of there from the corner, kind of getting involved in it. But I don't think that really did too much for White. I think if White had gone through and steamrolled him, I think he really could have gone and pushed on. And he's called out the likes of Joshua Parker, Fury. I just don't think them fights are going to happen next, and I don't know if I'll see them fight at any point, if we'll see them fights at any point. But nonetheless, like I say, he's had this fight. It was an interesting fight in the first place as to even why it was been made. Out in Gibraltar, yeah, it's happened now, and like I say, hopefully we'll see Dylan White get involved in the Riyadh season kind of fights again. But I'm just not too sure what level he goes in at and actually is able to have success at this point in his career. Moving on, Kaneshiro won via unanimous decision versus Agushken to remain Japanese youth bantamweight champion. Satsima won via TKO in round 3 versus Ichie Michi. Hara drew versus Sonagawa. Kunimoto won via TKO in round 1 versus Take Sato to remain WBO Asia Pacific middleweight champion. Lova won via TKO in round 1 versus Adeka Narudo to remain Oriental Pacific interim bantamweight champion. Simsiri won via split decision versus Taniguchi to remain Oriental Pacific light flyweight champion. Nishida won via KO in round 7 versus Don Sua to remain IBF world bantamweight champion. And I was able to see the brutal body shot knockout in which Nishida was able to deliver. I got my prediction right again. I think I got them all right this week. I might be wrong. Oh no, I got the Munguia Sorace one wrong. But I think everybody did. But yeah, so Nishida, beautiful body shot landed. It seems like all these Japanese fighters are able to land beautiful body work and always be able to get out their opponents from doing that. And hopefully we'll see him go on for a unification fight next. It seemed like he struggled to make this weight a little bit, so we have to wait and see if he has actually wanted to stick around at this weight division. But for the most part, that was a great victory for himself. A good kind of voluntary defence or mandatory. I'm not too sure if it was which one it was, but nonetheless, it was a great win. And like I say, hopefully, we'd like to see a unification fight next, and him actually get involved in the rest of the kind of big top rank events that are getting put on. Moving on, Captil won via TKO in round 2 versus Sarandi. Kaplan won via unanimous decision versus Gurke. Al-Bawani won via TKO in round 1 versus Megiasi. Goek won via KO in round 3 versus Turi. Hotak won via unanimous decision versus Kumich. More Hard won via unanimous decision versus Carrion. Kumchich won via unanimous decision versus Yildirim. Heidrich won via TKO in round 1 versus Lakatos. Pinago won via KO in round 5 versus Alacerlo to remain RBO World Youth Super Welterweight Champion. Mardenley won via TKO in round 2 versus Kirk Nan to become IBO International Light Heavyweight Champion. Sharla won via split decision versus Dietz to become IBF International and IBO Intercontinental Heavyweight Champion. Borman won via decision versus Meza to become WBO World Minimum Weight Champion. Sorry about my awful pronunciation as always. But yeah, that was a win for Borman. Again, progressing on. I wasn't able to find any footage of that again, unfortunately. But yeah, at the same time, Borman progresses on, becomes another world champion. Well, back at now minimum weight, and now I think it does set up the fight for Via, like I was saying in my prediction, and hopefully, we will see that next. Now moving on to the MMA news. Like I say, I know a lot of boxing news this week. Moving on to the MMA news, Haggerty versus Way and Pasio versus Brooks 3 will fight February 20th. Duplessis versus Strickland 2 and Zhang versus Suarez will fight to February 9th. It's great to see that rematch is happening because it's about time, to be honest. We were thinking perhaps Chimaev was going to slip in and slide in and get in there in that position before Strickland, but realistically, I want to see the rematch. I'm not too sure about everybody else, but I want to see the rematch. Blachowicz versus Ulberg and Tybura versus Parkin. And Menifil versus Sai, Duncan versus Yayev, McCann versus Nunez, and Bannon versus Thomas will fight March 22nd. So that's shaping up that nice UFC London card, in which one day I'd love to go to a UFC card in the UK. But yeah, Blachowicz versus Ulberg, I think is a great fight, to be honest. It's a good test for Ulberg and a good step up. And it's not just the same kind of guys fighting around in the light heavyweight division. So yeah, that's a nice fight. Shaw has retired. Makayev won by submission in round 1 versus So. That was his kind of first fight away from the UFC. I believe it was with Glory. I'm not too sure. But yeah, it was a stoppage in round 1. You can't go wrong with that. And I'm sure it's going to keep himself as a name mentioned around the flyweight division. Of course, with the whole weird situation as to why he was even kicked out of the UFC in the first place. Cannonier will fight Rodriguez February 15th. Northcutt has joined PFL. Makachev versus Sarukian 2. Davalishvili versus Nurmagomedov and Prohaska versus Hill will fight January 18th. I know this was probably announced last week, but I wasn't able to do a weekly fighting roundup last week, so I thought I'd mention it this week because it's a great card. 3 great fights there. I'm really excited for that Davalishvili fight because I think the narrative is getting built now, and yeah, excellent card. Musumeci won by points versus Machado, and that's Musumeci's first kind of time with UFC Fight Pass. I know it's the grappling events, and some people don't find them the most interesting, but I like them. I'm a fan of them, and I think Musumeci is a very talented grappler with a high IQ, and it's a very skilled fight type of fight to be able to fight. And yeah, now he's winning by points. He's not winning in too dramatic of a fashion, so perhaps he's found a bit of a better level than that of one championship. Blades will fight Kuniev February 22nd. It's interesting to see Kuniev getting put in to a fourth ranked opponent fight in his first fight in the UFC after the Contender series. I think it's showing that perhaps the UFC are a little bit desperate to make big fights in the heavyweight division again because there isn't really many available, bar of course the huge one versus Aspinall and Jones. Adesanya versus Imavov and Page versus Magomedov will fight February 1st. I think they're great fights in general. I think that Imavov Adesanya fight's been talked about by Adesanya for a little while now, and it's very nice to see that it's actually happening, and it should be happening. But then the Page versus Magomedov fight, I think two unorthodox strikers going at it. It's a perfect matchup, to be honest, and it's definitely going to be entertaining. I know that for sure. Rodriguez won by decision versus Knutson. Grant won via decision versus Grant. Maverick won via decision versus Horth. Lima won via decision versus Johns. Woodson won via KO in round 1 versus Padilla. Alvarez won via KO in round 1 versus Close. Johnson won via KO in round 2 versus Azar. Sterling won by decision versus Tokos. Marcos won by decision versus Yanez. Jacoby won via KO in round 3 versus Petrino. Cape won via KO in round 3 versus Silva. Swanson won via KO in round 3 versus Quantio. And Buckley won by KO in round 3 versus Covington. And to speak about this card in general, I think it was a very good card, to be honest, for a UFC Fight Night, a final UFC card of the year. And yeah, I think it really kind of showed up. The Johnson fight was a impressive knockout, even at this age and in which he is. Same with Swanson, both getting big knockouts at this point in their careers and the age in which they are. Huge knockouts for both of them. Interesting to see Yanez really been kind of not being able to compete the same way in which he once was, I suppose. You know, he was once bigged up and really kind of thought to be this next big guy, but now he's losing in fights like this. It's interesting to see, I suppose. And then, yeah, you kind of look on at Cape as well. Interesting performance. He's always been an interesting character to have around in the UFC. Really kind of hands down relaxed performance for himself where he was able to still get a good win. But you know, are you going to be able to do that against the higher level guys? I don't think so. Is he going to get a world title shot next? I know he was really calling for, I think he was even saying at mid rounds of round 2 to 3 to Dana White, but, you know, like I say, I'm not too sure. He has a lot to say, but like I say, I'm not too sure if actually any of that will happen. And then my fighter of the week, the last thing in which I'm calling, Yakin Buckley, great performance, KO at round 3 versus Covington. Obviously, it wasn't a proper KO. It was the kind of doctor stoppage, but in the end, he kind of, in my opinion, looked excellent. He shut most things down from Covington. Most of them kind of rushing takedown attempts. He kind of just shut them out straight away. Made Covington look weak. Made Covington look poor. Made it look like he couldn't compete. And Buckley win by a comfortable margin realistically, and the turnaround in which he's had in his career. Now he's looking like the way he is in the welterweight division. This is definitely a huge fight for himself, and it's definitely going to progress him on into the division. It'll be interesting to see who he fights next. Of course, he was meant to fight Ian Garry for this one. It would have been an interesting contest, and I would still be for seeing that fight next. So perhaps we'll see that one next. But at the same time, in my opinion, he's the fighter of the week. Even though, you know, like I say, we're going for all these great fights, he's the fighter of the week for myself. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did, like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.